Um, yes. So in any case, I went to Varanasi. I've been to Varanasi before, but I did a Fulbright year there studying at the Krishnamurti Center. And I got to know Varanasi fairly well. I mean, it's huge. It's deep and it's multi-layered, but I'm in love with it. And so when I went back on my sabbatical to the Krishnamurti Center and studied there with the person who, if there is a person on earth today who understands Krishnamurti at at the greatest depths. He lives there. He's the rector of the college there. And that's where I taught during my Fulbright. I taught at the Women's College, which is called Vasanta College, which is a play on words. Vasanta means spring, but it's also a play on the name Annie Besant. I don't know if you know her, but she was a quite mover. She was a mover and shaker in the 19th and 20th centuries. She was in the Indian independence movement, and she was a staunch atheist until she read something in the Theosophical corpus, and then she flipped and she became interested in esotericism and transpersonal psychology and the big cosmic picture. So we'll get into that later if we get into theosophy. But in any case, I taught at Vasanta, and I went back to visit. I wanted to see how it's going. I wanted to check out the new Ghat. I don't know if you know what Ghats are, but Ghats are those long staircases that go down to the Ganges. And Benares, or Varanasi, is known for its Ghats. And I lived on the Ghats in my little cabin while I was there in January and February, and got to see all my old buddies from the Krishnamurti Center and kind of got the vibe of Krishnamurti. I lived right next to his little room where he stayed when he was alive. And he was alive until 1985. And I met him only once, but a lot of people there knew him and knew him very well. So it was good for me when I'm writing about Krishnamurti to meet as many people as I could that knew him, and also to see one of his very famous schools, because he was very interested in education, which I can talk about a little bit later. So I went to Varanasi and got to meet with some scholars of Kashmiri Shaivism who are very famous and who live on the Ghats in Varanasi. And then I got to go where Buddha preached his first sermon, which is called Sarnath, which is 17 kilometers from where I lived. I used to walk it, not every day, but a couple of times a week. I would walk over to Sarnath and see all the kinds of Buddhism that are there. And it's a holy place. So Varanasi is considered the holiest place to Hindus, and that's why they go to die there, and to be on the Ganges, and to be cremated on the banks of the Ganges. So it's always kind of wonderful for me to go there. So I did that, and then I also did a little stint at an Ayurvedic center in South India, because we're always trying to clean up our acts, aren't we? And it was good to learn more about Ayurveda. I've been there before, and I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot, and I feel better. So I went there with a friend of mine who is an anthroposophical doctor. So I was getting, every single day, I was getting information about Ayurveda as well as anthroposophy. And I don't know if you know Rudolf Steiner, but he was, he had his fingers in a lot of pies, one of which was medicine. And he created anthroposophical education, anthroposophical medicine, anthroposophical cosmology, etc. So I was learning a lot with her. She's a good buddy. And she's an MD and an anthroposophical doctor. So it was rich. My time in India was rich. Then I came back and threw myself into finishing this draft. And the manuscript is now with Cambridge. It's not out. So it's in peer review. So who knows what they'll say to me? I mean, I may have to make huge changes. I don't know. But you'll be the first to know. Anyway, the sabbatical was wonderful, and thanks for asking.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm gonna one day tag along with you on some sort of adventure. Wow. Well, yeah, we know book, I'm sure the book will be well received and hopefully get out there as soon as possible because I want to read it. I'm sure there are so many people just so eager to read it. And so I wonder if you could talk a little about your book. And I love that the title is Krishnamurti, of course, but Self-Inquiry, Awakening, and Transformation. And that seems so important to our department here and to the world in general. So yeah.
Well, I've been teaching a course on Krishnamurti since maybe 98. So we've
I
had a
took
long
it with you one year.
time. Krishnamurti in ethical theory, Krishnamurti in cosmology, Krishnamurti in philosophy. I've done every angle on Krishnamurti you can think of. Right now, I'm teaching a course on J. Krishnamurti, Bohemian dialogue, and inquiry. So that's being offered right now. And it has an interesting draw from many different departments at CIIS. So I started the book actually with some quotes from people who had taken one or more of my courses on Krishnamurti. And I want to share those with you. Now, these are quotes from people just like you who've taken this course. It gives you some idea of how they view Krishnamurti. Okay, Krishnamurti showed me a new way to live, quote, full stop. Encountering Krishnamurti changed my life. With his direct blow to ego, my naive righteousness matured into creative inquiry. Sounds like somebody from our department. Krishnamurti taught me to stop believing everything that I think. He showed me that my thoughts are illusory and easily manipulated. Krishnamurti had a profound impact on the way that I think, especially his emphasis on the value of living with a question. Living with a question challenges me in the day-to-day step beyond relying on information, opinions, and ideas gleaned from others towards finding out for myself through investigation and self-inquiry. So that gives you an idea of the import of the teaching to some people. And basically, it can be summarized as self-inquiry. If you want to know the quotation from him, it is, "Be a light to yourself." So Krishnamurti had no use for organizations. He didn't like religions at all. In fact, he didn't like anything that was created through thought. He wanted to go beyond thought, directly to perception. So he made a big distinction between perception and thinking. Perception is seeing in the moment, which is not at all unlike what the Buddha said. In fact, if we were to compare him to any thinker that I know, it would be clearly the message of the Buddha. And so it's hard to distinguish the two, and I don't even like to do comparative studies, but I would say that if you understand the Buddha's message, you would be very much in sync with Krishnamurti. The thing about Krishnamurti is that he claimed never to have read or studied anything, especially the Hindu scriptures, so that everything he came upon himself. He wasn't quoting from anybody, and he was hell-bent on telling you and me not to rely on any authority. The only authority comes from your own direct perception, and that comes only from self-inquiry, and that comes from living with the question. So that's the big umbrella of K. We call him K, because Krishnamurti is a lot of syllables to say over and over again. So it was fascinating to me because I'm interested in self-inquiry. I teach another course on self-inquiry. Very interesting to me to understand Krishnamurti's vocabulary around self-inquiry, because it's quite new in a way. There's a way in which you can kind of get lost with Buddhist terms or Hindu terms. I study Hinduism a lot too. So you get lost in the Sanskrit or the Pali, and you get kind of confused with these monosyllabic words. Whereas Krishnamurti spoke only in English, only using words that we know. He used words like conditioning, identification, fear, death, know yourself, perception, the meaning of life, things like that. He didn't even use the word cosmology very much. So that's sort of what his teaching is about. And he did, I think he would be considered a philosopher, although he wouldn't like that term, because he asked questions that are philosophical questions. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? What are we supposed to do? Why does fear bug me? Why do I live my life in fear? What is death? What does it mean to die every day? These are some of the questions he covers. And then, of course, his really piercing insight is that as long as you're thinking and you're identified with a role, that is me, I'm talking about me, as long as you're talking about me and mine, you're not going to be able to see that place that he's beckoning you to. So in many, many ways, it's an Eastern philosophy, a non-dual philosophy that's not unlike other non-dual philosophies. But what's interesting about him is that he came upon it himself, and that he has this current language, and that he speaks in English, although he gives unusual meanings to some of the words that we consider everyday words, one of which is religion. To him, religion is not the thing that's down the street at the church. It's what's going on when you live in a life of unity, when you're not fragmented. So in that sense, he gives new definition to some very common terms, but he doesn't have any truck with religious institutions. In fact, somebody went to him and said, "Oh, we're so upset they're not letting the untouchables into the temple." He said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. God's not there anyway."
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you. And gosh, there's so many things percolating. And first, I better say this because I'm sure some of the other faculty, and especially Jocelyn, is saying we will not allow dissertations based on the Krishnamurti style of enlightenment, that you will have to research academic work. But it's really interesting because I took a class with you on Krishnamurti and heuristic inquiry, I think in 2003. And at the same time, I was taking a class with our very own, now retired emeritus faculty, Leslie Coombs, on synchronicity. And I think my research focus question in that class was about love. And at the culmination of it, I was at a conference honoring Thomas Berry, and I had lunch with my mentor, Carl Anthony, a friend, Drew Dellinger, who teaches at CIIS sometimes, and Brian Swim. And I looked over because synchronicities and so many things were happening. And there you were just having lunch at like the table over. And it was just kind of a wild thing that sometimes when we surrender and not try to force knowledge, all of the things just come to us. And so it changed my life. And I've got so many questions for you, but maybe uh, right now, in terms of so many of these, maybe, and I know Krishnamurti K did not want to be like a religious figure or philosophy leader, or definitely not a cult leader, anything like that, but he's got quite a following. Yet there's so many in kind of retrospect and currently being dismantled by their bad behaviors with Me Too and money issues. But it seems like Krishnamurti never had those issues. And I wonder if you could say why.
Yeah, well, first of all, to go back to your notion about, yes, he didn't want to be an authority. And he spoke. He gave up his mantle, let's say, of the world teacher, which the Theosophical Society had put upon him in 1914. And he carried through with that. And there was a worldwide international organization built in his name called the Order of the Star in the East. He, of course, was the Star in the East. But he dismantled that in 1929 because he didn't like what the Theosophical Society was putting on him. They were projecting this image of what they thought the world teacher would be. It was going to be this great authority that was going to lift the universe up, as the Buddha had done so many years before, so many centuries. And so he said, no, I won't do that. I'm here to teach what I know, which is how to set men, sorry about the men, but set people unconditionally free. And he spoke on his own then from 1929 until his death in 1985. For 60 years, he spoke and said, and every time he ever spoke, he said, I am not an authority. I can't teach you. I can't tell you. I can just ask questions and prompt you to ask your own questions. So now I got into the authority business. And what was the other part of the question?
Of other kind of, yeah.
Why he wasn't a degraded guru. Well, I also study Hindu gurus, and yes, we've had our share of those who've been, and also Buddhists, of gurus who have been, well, some have been defrocked, and then some have just been slandered, and then some have been caught. And I don't think anybody's in jail. I think most of the people in jail are the Christian gurus. But in any case, I'm interested in gurus. And he was relatively immune to that. He did have a relationship, a heterosexual relationship with a woman, which extended over some time. And there were actually some pregnancies involved. And I think they ended with abortions. But everybody knew that. And it didn't hamper his teaching. And he was never against sex. He never said you have to be an ascetic. And he never said you can be he never said not to have any discipline. I mean, he was a very disciplined person himself because he grew up as a South Indian Brahmin. And there's certain things that you do and you don't do if you're a South Indian Brahmin. They have very strict regulations about eating and about fraternizing with other people and about cleanliness. So he was a very disciplined person himself, but he didn't make this liaison. He never married the woman. She was married, and they never had a child together. So, but that was kind of known by everyone. And I put that in the book because I'm a sociologist. I'm not a devotee. I'm not trying to recruit people. So I was honest about it. And as far as I know, even his biographers have all said, yes, he had the relationship. Yes, it was intimate. And yes, it was ongoing. But it didn't seem to change his message. And it didn't seem to change the reception of his message from those who were listening to him. Mm-hmm. So I think he was relatively immune, although a lot of people have brought up this relationship and said, well, if you can't have a perfect guru, you can't have a perfect teaching. But most of us don't look at it that way. We say, can we look at it and see that there's a person over here who is living a life as a human being, and then there might be some kind of an inspired message. And that might be the way you would look at it. In any case, you're right. He did not suffer in any way, as far as I can tell, from having had that relationship. And certainly with money, he never needed any. He had so many rich donors from all over the world, particularly India, Switzerland, the United States, Hollywood particularly. These are people that had a lot of money. So he never wanted for anything. And they all bought him huge pieces of real estate all around the world. He was often in Saanen, which of course is upper class place in Switzerland. He has, I don't know, 70 or 80 acres sitting on the Ganges, which was a present to him from Annie Besant. He has a huge property in Ojai, which is in Southern California. So he just never had any need for money, and he didn't have any money. And people were not charged for hearing him. I heard him in Ojai. You just go there, and with 2,000 or 3,000 people, you sit under a bunch of oak trees and listen to Krishnamurti. And there was never any charge for that. So he wasn't the kind of guru that was looking for money, mainly because he didn't need money. So it's a very interesting setup. And when you say there are a lot of people who follow him, it's hard to know that because he refused to have any organization set up in his name in which people would be members. So we don't have any membership rolls. I mean, we know how many people went with Amrit Desai. We know how many people study with the guru of Shambhala. We have membership rolls. We have people who take courses, but Krishnamurti never did that. So to the extent that he's affected people, these little quotations from my students might be as much as we have. I mean, people have written books about him, about having known him. And Aldous Huxley wrote some very interesting things. Of course, he was a great thinker in Southern California among New Age, the beginning of the New Age. So he was a great respecter of Krishnamurti and had a long-standing relationship with him. But in any case, just to say that we don't have good records, and I'm a sociologist, so I'm always interested in records, but we don't have a clue as to how many people have been affected. Interestingly, when I get onto planes, sometimes I take a little book with me, a little Krishnamurti book, because all of his books are usually small, and I'm reading on the plane. I've had more people turn to me and say, I read that book, it changed my life. Or somebody would say, I know that guy. It's really funny because he's very esoteric, I would say. I mean, he's not known to too many people. And yet, when I go out in public with a little book in my hand, people recognize it. So curious is what I'd say. Maybe that's what you're talking about with this synchronicity.
Yeah, gosh. Well, there's so many things, of course, that keep bubbling up. And I wonder, maybe I can combine these all in one question, because I also then want to, beyond the book, ask you more questions about you and some of your other pursuits as well. But with Krishnamurti, I was surprised with reading him firsthand that how much he actually speaks about both ecological issues and social justice issues. And in the chat, people have also brought up, and I know this is a core theme of his work, around just suffering.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Suffering was big. Suffering, dying. And, he was one of those that said you should die every day. And meaning that you should die to your identity every day. And discover something new every single day about who you are and what might be underneath the identifications or the conditioning that we're all bound by. I mean, that was his real diagnosis of our situation, is that we are bound. We are not free because we have these projections being put upon us, and then we absorb them, we internalize them. So how do I get outside of Connie for just a moment? Because Connie has got lots of needs and lots of problems and lots of considerations. So that would be the whole idea, would be to move outside of that. What did you were asking?
Ecological and social themes?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to say something about the social justice issue. He refused to call himself an Indian, a Hindu, or a world teacher, or even a man, meaning a male person. He said that's an identification. And whenever there's an identification, there's a problem because I'm limited. And he was always asking us to try to find a non-identified part of self, which is free, which can have free attention and free awareness. Not unlike what I think the Buddha was trying to tell us. So what does it mean then to not to identify as a member of a tribe or a member of the feminist movement or some movement? So consequently, he would never be in sync with any movement because you would be limiting yourself. Why not be the same as everyone? So there it gets into this notion of let's don't identify ourselves as, in identity politics would be the term we use today. Let's not identify ourselves as against anybody else. He was very much against conflict, but trying to understand conflict in ourselves. Not only do we have conflict among groups, we have conflicts in ourselves. So he asked us to look at ourselves and see, is the Connie that's the professor having a little trouble apportioning her time with the Connie who's the dog walker, with the Connie who wants to be appreciated in the neighborhood, or the Connie who wants to publish a book? So we look inside, we see there's conflict, we see a big word for him was division. There's a lot of division, and division brings conflict. So why not just say that I'm like everybody else? Because I really, in essence, I am, aren't I? I mean, I'm conditioned just like you're conditioned. So even these dastardly folks in Washington, D.C., even they are like us. However pathetic we may think they are, then can we step outside that judgment for a while and just see our own contribution to the conflict and strife in the world? So he was adamant about just, don't rely on this identification with a role or with a status, because it's going to bring you in competition with other people. And consequently, when he started his schools, he would never allow people to give grades. Oh yeah, never, never, never. And so the whole idea was not to be in competition and to let whatever's inside you flower, because you can educate yourself when nobody else can. That was the whole idea, is that we must be free. So when you even to say to a child, you say thank you now because somebody gave you a candy, he'd say that's forcing conditioning on a child. So let the child be grateful or not be grateful. Just let the child recognize what's going on in himself.
Wow, so profound.
So if you really take him to heart, you'd be kind of out of social movements in a way. But you would be bringing a critical view to everything that happens. And so we know that social movements start out with the greatest intent, and sometimes they end up being very oppressive. So he was very clear about that once you organize people, you have the fear, you have the jeopardy that might come with someone's identifying and then feeling, as this person said, self-righteous. So when I feel self-righteous, sometimes my ends are used to justify my means. And he was clearly against violence. So anything that brought any violence would be definitely not to be helpful. And not only is it the violence against minority groups and against social movements, but there's violence that we do to ourselves. So this inner view, this view of oneself, the self-analysis and being a light to oneself, look and see how we can be violent to ourselves. In many ways, we might be the most violent to ourselves, more than any others. And I don't know about you, but in Oakland, there's this kind of fear that's settling in because there's so much violence going on in the streets of Oakland, which is where I live. But the question is, maybe the greater violence might be inside me. So, so social justice issues for sure. That's my tinkle. Then ecological issues. He was really quite a lovely writer.
Mm,
And he would spend some time alone in nature all the time, every
mm,
day, and take walks. He was a big walker. And then he would write in his notebooks, Krishnamurti's notebooks, what he would see. And what's interesting about him that I wish I could emulate is his perception. He
mm,
could take in so much that most of us kind of overlook.
mm,
And he said, you know, the minute you see a bird on a tree, it's so beautiful. But the minute you say to yourself, I'm seeing a bird on a tree, the bird is gone. The experience of seeing the bird is over because you've now moved into thought.
mm,
So the whole notion of putting everything into words is a way in which we divorce ourselves from the actual experience. So
mm,
yes, he was definitely, and his properties all around the world are quite glorious. He
mm,
took one place in South India, which was a desert, and made it this lush, beautiful valley. It's called Rishi Valley School, which is where people go. In fact, Vandana Shiva's son went there.
mm,
That's where I met her at Rishi Valley. So, yes, he was adamant about ecology, but I think it came not because he thought it was a good thing to do, but because he literally saw the importance
mm,
of being in tune with nature and being in tune with all of us. So there's this intricate web of interconnectedness that Krishnamurti always called upon, which is also part of esoteric teaching, that we're not separate individuals. We just think we are through our conditioning and identification. So, can we pop out of that for even moments every day and see that we are connected?
mm. So amazing. And I think you're emulating that quite well. Um, I pulled out a quote which it feels so um, directly related to what you're talking about, and I loved being introduced to the term that Krishnamurti has put in his writing about being a firsthand being. And let me read this quote, and I would just love to hear what you might say about it. And I think it's already in line in everything you're already saying. But and I think this is from it is from Freedom from the Known. When there is space between you and the object you are observing, you will know there is no love. And without love, however hard you try to reform the world or bring about a new social order, or however much you talk about improvements, you will only create agony. So it is up to you.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful quote. Bless your heart. You did the right thing there. Yeah. He was very interested in trying to show us that the observer is the observed. And this has everything to do with our projections and our notions of who we are. So, who is it that is seeing? If I'm seeing you clearly without Connie involved, then I can see you. And there can be really nothing there but love, you know,
Mm,
even though you could be this nasty person from Washington, D.C. I use that as an example, our stereotype of nasty people. But the minute that there's Connie over here looking at you, then there's all kinds of, it's a setup for ways in which I can divide and judge and separate and have conflict. Yeah. So what does it mean? I mean, this takes a lot of explaining to go into what does it mean that the observer is the observed? Well, it means the simple thing that I can only see what I project, for one thing, if I'm in my own identification. But then there's also this notion that if I'm not in my identification, I really am you. I really am. I really participate in a reality that includes you. So he takes us to some pretty abstract levels, some pretty high levels, and in a very different way, I might add, from the Buddha, because the
mm,
Buddha tells us step by step by step how to get there. Krishnamurti just says, I'm here, come and join me.
right. Oh, so great. Well, and I know I love that you use yourself as an example of like the, the whole kind of separate, instead of pointing at someone else. And you said, well, let's not get into inner, but can we for a moment switch to getting into inner Connie? Because I think you emulate so much of the research that you do, and you're such a being of graciousness and love and curiosity, and you have a deep feminist background, and you're also one of those people that's just always inviting everyone kind of into your world if they want to be into it, and you're so specific about your health and generating kind of just this breath of radiance and good health. And you've got your pup that's like your dear friend, and just like, who is Connie? And tell us a little bit about how you became this being, especially since you study so much of this, but similar to Krishnamurti, you're kind of not a follower of any one being.
That's right. Well, I mean, it's a long story.
Well, maybe yeah.
I've been interested in religion since I was probably could walk,
Mm.
because I grew up in the South. And actually, I was abused by religion because some of my extended family were fundamentalists and we were liberal Christians. And so I was told that I was going to hell, and that my grandmother, who was a saint, was going to hell. So I immediately tuned up and understood, oh, this is important. And it's true that religion in the South is important. So that's when I became interested in religion. And that's why I went into sociology of religion. And I grew up in, I went to school at what we could call a patriarchal sociology department. And when I asked, could I do a dissertation, and because these were the days when you didn't tell people what you were going to do a dissertation on, you had to ask. When I asked if I could study a new religious movement, my advisor said, no, because they'll all think that you believe in that stuff. So that was the end of that. So I did my dissertation on a very objective element in the caste system in India. But the moment that was finished, I went straight to my postdoc in Berkeley, where I just immersed myself in new religious movements. And so that's really how I became interested in the finer details and the small groups, that what I consider the little workshops of reality. It's where we all get together and kind of hammer out, negotiate our definitions of what's real. And that's kind of what turns me on, is to see these small groups and how they come together, not actually including what little group is here because we're creating reality together right now too. So what does it mean that people create meaning in these little groups? That was fascinating to me. And how does it happen that people throw away one system and buy another one, which is called conversion? And so I got interested in conversion careers. How did somebody become a Muni and then a Buddhist and then a Pentecostal Christian? And all of that is absolutely fascinating to me, because I've also studied America and we're good at it. So that gives you a little hint. That brings you up to my postdoc. And then after having studied new religions for a very long time, and also studying the philosophy behind the religions, because I'm very interested in Advaita Vedanta, which is the non-dual Sanskrit Hindu tradition that has flowered into many of these Hindu movements today. And I'm also interested in Buddhist scriptures. So I also became interested in Hindu and Buddhist scriptures in Eastern philosophy. And I'll be teaching a course in the spring on contemplative systems from the East, Hinduism and Buddhism and Sufism. So what I'm trying to say is that over time, I've become more interior, because I'm realizing that all of these questions relate to me. And why am I interested in why you join something? Maybe I'm interested in why I'm joining. So everything now becomes a reflection of my life. And that's why I find Krishnamurti so interesting, because the depths at which you can go in sociology are far exceeded by the depths that you can go within the self. So the whole question of self-inquiry is still my drumbeat for life. And it's led me into other esoteric studies. That's why I'm also interested in Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff is different from Krishnamurti. I think they're both talking about the ultimate end as being the same, but Gurdjieff has many, many, many steps, and Krishnamurti doesn't. He just says, get here. And he somehow gets us there in a way. I mean, he gets us interested at least. So, does that cover enough of my life?
I guess so, although I'm sure in future intensives and definitely in future one-on-one time, I'm going to ask you more questions.